Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong there just because of the way you look? Or the color of your skin? Dr. Maya Ellison, 52 years old, an aerospace engineer who helped establish the very flight safety standards the whole world relies on today, went through that exact experience right aboard SkyWest Global Flight 729 from San Francisco to London Heathrow. Note, main characters and setting Dr. Maya Ellison, SkyWest Global 729 San Francisco, London Heathrow. She only wanted to sit quietly in seat 2A, the one she paid for with her own hard-earned money. But then came a man named Bradley Stone, confident, powerful, demanding that she switch seats because of his million-dollar deal. And after just a few polite refusals, the entire cabin seemed to turn its back on her. If it were you being treated as an obstacle in a space where you have every right to exist, how would you respond? With anger, defiance, or silence, letting the world expose its own truth? Only 10 minutes after being escorted off the plane, that woman made the entire runway stop, and justice began to speak from the silence. Hit like, share, and subscribe, and join me as we step into the story of a black woman was escorted off the plane. 10 minutes later, she shut down the runway. The story doesn't begin with a fight or a heated argument, but with a quiet moment, the kind of quiet known only to someone who has spent a lifetime among the sounds of jet engines and people talking about speed, safety, and limits. On SkyWest Global Flight 729 from San Francisco to London Heathrow that morning, the first-class cabin was bathed into soft daylight spilling through the window shades, reflected off the cream leather seats like a fine mist. Amid that calm glow sat Dr. Maya Ellison, 52 years old, quietly in seat 2A. No one paid attention to the black woman in a gray suit, her sharp yet serene eyes scanning a thick document titled Safety Protocol Revision, 2025. They didn't know that this very woman co-authored many of the safety regulations the airline was following. The words in that report had once saved thousands of lives, and today they rested in the hands of the one who wrote them. Maya was the kind of person the world rarely sees, but always depends on. She wasn't famous online, didn't stand on stages, didn't argue in public. She taught at the National Institute of Aeronautics, where every student knew if Dr. Maya Ellison was lecturing. You listened with full respect because every sentence she spoke could determine how a plane lands in crisis. Her wisdom wasn't measured by titles or diplomas, but by how she saw the world, a world she had made safer, but never fairer. On the plane, she liked window seats, not for the view, but because it let her see the wing, her favorite part, a reminder of why she chose this field. There's nothing else that faces wind, endures pressure, and still keeps its balance like a pair of wings. The attendant poured her a glass of orange juice. She nodded slightly in thanks, her voice gentle, almost a breath. She was used to being judged by looks, at 52, as a black woman in a world of white engineers. Maya had learned the power of silence, the kind that makes your voice more valuable when you finally use it. They called her the Iron Lady of the Skies, but to Maya, iron didn't mean cold, it meant resilient. She looked around. The first-class cabin gleamed bright, elegant, serene, like a chapel in the clouds, but peace that fragile could shatter with a single wrong word. A few rows back, Bradley Stone, a 38-year-old businessman, was talking loudly about his upcoming million-dollar deal. His kind of boasting was nothing new on flights like these where people believed money made everything reasonable. Maya heard the word London again and again, followed by laughter and the pop of a wine cork. But she didn't pay attention. Her work always transcended the small boundaries of human ego. She worked for something greater, the safety of millions of nameless passengers. The report in her hand bore a yellow sticky note, Check Revision 7B, Passenger Handling, a rule that might seem dry, yet it came from 10 years of experience, hundreds of accident investigations, and countless closed-door meetings. She wrote it not just to protect passengers, but to protect those who served them, people easily tempted to misuse authority in moments of crisis. She didn't know that in just a few minutes, the very policy she had written would determine the fate of this flight. Maya opened her laptop and typed a few notes. No one knew she was updating the section called De-Escalation Framework, the conflict resolution protocol between crew and passengers. In that document, there was a line she once emphasized to her psychology engineering team. When humans lose their calm, power must be replaced with reason, not authority. She believed that more than any other rule, because she had seen too many people removed from flights, not for being dangerous, but simply because someone felt they didn't belong. As sunlight tilted through the window and brushed across her face, Maya closed her eyes for a moment. Inside her mind, numbers aligned into equations, memories of dozens of flights, international conferences, safety audits all weaving together into one truth. Keep the skies as fair as gravity itself. It pulls everyone down the same way. Across the aisle, a maintenance technician recognized her. He thought about greeting her, but stopped afraid to disturb the calm surrounding that woman. She gave a small nod, a thin smile like a thread just enough to say, "I see you." Then, the quiet was broken by the thud of a suitcase against a seat and a voice loud, confident, but lacking restraint. "Excuse me. Could you switch seats with me? I need to sit next to my colleague to finish our $1 million presentation." Bradley Stone, the man from seat 2C, was now standing before her. Maya looked up, her expression calm. "I'm sorry, but I chose this seat for professional reasons." Her tone was gentle, neither defensive nor hostile. But in Bradley's world, refusal was defiance. The cabin seemed to pause for one heartbeat. Bradley's lips tightened. He forced a smile. "Do you even know who I am? I've got $1 million deal to close." Maya replied, same tone, same composure. "I have important work of my own." In that moment, no one realized justice had just entered the cabin, not in the form of a lawyer or a cop, but in the calm presence of a middle-aged woman sitting exactly where she belonged. Eyes began to turn toward them, a few head shakes, a few smirks, whispers drifting like air between the seats. No one spoke loudly, but in their eyes, judgment was already forming. A black woman refusing a white man in the first class for that alone was out of order. Maya felt it, the shift in the air, the unspoken verdict. But she didn't react. She didn't need to. She simply placed the document back on her tray, her hands steady, unnervingly calm. She had been judged before. She had been excluded from meetings, mocked with jokes that weren't really jokes, but she knew if she lost her temper, she would lose the one thing that set her apart, dignity. And in that very instant, when the world around her began to crack over something as small as a request, the true test began. No one in that cabin knew that. Just a few minutes later, the silence of that woman would bring an entire runway to a halt. The calm inside the first-class cabin seemed untouched, but with one simple request. It began to crack, not because of volume, but because of the power behind the words. Bradley Stone, 38, American businessman, solid build, charcoal gray suit, polished shoes. He moved with the confidence of a man used to being accommodated not because he needed to be, but because he believed he deserved to be. He looked around the cabin with the eyes of someone assessing a boardroom, not a space where others sought peace before a long flight. "Excuse me, would you mind switching seats?" Bradley's voice was clear, firm, confident, a command wrapped in a thin layer of courtesy. The woman he was addressing, Dr. Maya Ellison, looked up, not defensive, not irritated, just calm as if she were observing an experiment whose outcome she already knew. "I'm afraid not," she said softly. "I chose this seat because I have some work to do during the flight." It was the kind of polite answer no one could object to. Yet, for someone accustomed to get in his way, even the gentlest refusal still stung the ego. Bradley tilted his head. The polite smile vanished. "I've got a big meeting in London, a multi-million-dollar deal. You understand, right? I need to sit next to my colleague to finish our presentation." He gestured toward Clara Jenkins, the young woman seated a row behind his colleague, trying to smile, her eyes pleading not to be part of this. Maya nodded once, saying nothing more. She didn't need to explain that she was finalizing a report for the International Aviation Commission, or that she had co-authored Safety Code 7B, the very document on which every airline based its procedures. She simply knew this when someone starts defining their importance by numbers. They've already forgotten what real value means. The air in the cabin shifted subtly. Passengers who had been pretending to read or watch movies began to glance over. Some acted as if they hadn't heard, but everyone had. A few tight smiles appeared, the kind that said, "It's just a seat. Why not give it up?" And somewhere in those glances, prejudice began to take form. People no longer saw Maya as a passenger, but as a problem. A middle-aged black woman refusing a younger white man, successful, articulate, confident in this world, that often seemed unreasonable. Clara Jenkins lowered her head, pretending to be busy with her laptop. She knew Bradley liked to show off, but she hadn't expected him to do it so publicly. She thought of saying something, but his look was enough to keep her silent. Bradley still stood there, his hand gripping the back of seat 2A, as if just one more moment would get him what he wanted. "I think the airline should be more flexible," he said, half complaint, half warning. His voice carried 3 rows around, could hear every word. Flight attendant Monica Ruiz, preparing a drink tray nearby, glanced over, then quickly looked away, the kind of look that said, "I don't want to get involved." Maya no longer looked at him. She simply turned the page of her document, her highlighter tracing each section, a small, ordinary gesture, but in Bradley's eyes, it was defiance. And for men used to attention, silence can feel unbearable. "I was just asking," Bradley said again, his voice lower now, but tinged with irritation. "You don't have to be so difficult. This time," Maya looked up. "I'm not being difficult. Sir, I'm just reading my work." The cabin fell into a heavy silence, not peaceful, but uncertain, as people tried to decide whose side they were on. Monica stepped closer, wearing her best trained service smile. "Sir, may I help you with something?" Bradley turned to her, smiling again. "I just need to switch seats. She's being uncooperative." Monica glanced at Maya, then at Thomas Grant, the lead flight attendant watching from a distance. She spoke gently. Perhaps if the lady agrees, it would make service more convenient for everyone. A sugar-coated sentence, but everyone could taste the bitterness inside. Maya nodded slightly. Thank you, but I'm fine here. No anger, no argument, just that quiet, steady calm which somehow made Bradley feel as if he was being publicly rejected. And, for those accustomed to compliance, rejection is humiliation. Whispers began to drift through the cabin like wind over still water. Someone murmured, "She should just switch. It's not a big deal." Another whispered back, "She has the right to stay." The words were soft, but enough to turn a private moment into a public stage. Bradley straightened his jacket and took a half-step back. "Do you know who I am?" It wasn't a question anymore. It was a declaration. He believed reputation, money, or at least volume, would command obedience. Maya replied, so softly you had to lean in to hear "No, sir, but I know who I am." For a second, the air stopped moving. A single sentence, but it sliced clean through the arrogance in his voice. Bradley said nothing more. He drew a breath and turned away. Monica gripped her tray a little tighter, her eyes betraying a flicker of unease. Clara lowered her head, pretending to look at her screen, but her hands trembled slightly. As Bradley returned to his seat, Maya exhaled not relief, but recalibration. She had faced tension in NASA boardrooms, at Bowen, at the FAA, but nowhere felt lonelier than a crowded airplane cabin. She knew the conflict wasn't over. The stares around her said as much. The whispers carried a single word she heard clearly: attitude. She looked out the window, where bands of white clouds drifted past the wing. Amid them, she recalled her own line in the 7B report. Every conflict in the air begins with a prejudice on the ground. A few rows back, Bradley leaned toward Monica, speaking quietly. She nodded, then walked away. About 5 minutes later, Thomas Grant, the lead flight attendant, approached wearing the practiced smile of someone who had handled hundreds of small problems. But this one wasn't small, because he didn't realize he was about to confront the very woman who had written the rule book he was about to enforce. From this point on, the story would no longer be about switching seats. It would become the story of a woman tested by the very system she helped build, where her silence wasn't weakness, but a mirror held up to the conscience of an entire industry. The first-class cabin no longer felt as smooth as before. The engines still hummed, the lights still glowed softly, but around seat 2A, something invisible had tightened. Not a sound, not a gesture, a sense that someone had pressed against the boundary between power and dignity. Bradley Stone leaned back and folded his arms. The raised brow, the lifted chin, the habits of a man used to having the last word. He wasn't exactly a bad person. He was simply a man who'd never had to prove the good. His world glass-walled offices, brown leather boardroom tables, emails signed CEO had taught him that money is the one thing that never requires an introduction. He stared straight at Dr. Maya Ellison, the woman of color still seated there, one hand resting lightly on her documents, as if nothing at all had happened. "Do you know who I am?" His voice sharpened, half warning, half test. The air around them dipped. In many other rooms, that question could make the other person yield on instinct. But Maya wasn't the kind of person who bowed to titles. She looked up at him not defiant, but with the gaze of someone who has watched too many times. Humans lose themselves in a rush of power. "I don't "Sir," she answered, voice even light as wind brushing a still lake. "But I know who I am. Short, not sharp, not philosophical, yet in the silence that followed, you could hear your own heart." Bradley hesitated. No one had ever answered him like that. To him, "Do you know who I am?" had always opened the door to deference. Today, it opened into a quiet void, his words dropping in and disappearing. He gave a thin laugh. "Working to recover his posture, I've got a multi-million-dollar deal to close. Every minute counts." Maya didn't look away. She dipped her chin, once understanding without agreeing. "I understand. I have important work of my own." That was all. Nothing more. In the way she said it, it wasn't confrontation. It was a simple affirmation of her own worth. Around the cabin, people began to feel uneasy. A middle-aged man lowered his Financial Times and glanced over. A silver-haired woman in front tilted her head, curiosity tangled with caution. Flight attendant Monica Ruiz, who had watched the whole exchange, stood still for a beat, tray in hand, unsure whether to step in or step back. The way everyone kept quiet made the space feel heavier. This silence wasn't harmless. It was selective, the kind reserved for moments when people fear choosing the wrong side. Bradley sensed the eyes on him, and it bothered him. He lifted his chin and spoke louder. "I don't want trouble. I just think you should be a little flexible. I don't want anyone wasting time on something trivial." He pressed on trivial, as if to redefine the issue. But the issue had never been the seat. It was the bigger question: who gets to decide who deserves to sit where? Maya looked at him for a second, then lowered her gaze and set her pen to the page. In that moment, she didn't write anything at all. She drew a short line along the margin like an invisible boundary between respect and privilege. She had seen men like Bradley before, men convinced their success proved they were better, forgetting that some doors only open for certain shades of skin. She didn't hate them. She pitied how privilege walls them off from justice and from themselves. Clara Jenkins, Bradley's colleague, nudged her glasses and sighed. She knew that if Maya yielded just a little, the moment would pass, but she also knew in those eyes there was something that couldn't bend to social habit. She looked at Bradley, wanting to stop him, then said nothing. She was afraid she'd be the next one under the cabin's collective stare. And so, as so often in history, injustice continued not because someone was cruel, but because so many were quiet. Bradley inhaled, folded his arms, leaned back, eyes fixed ahead. He tried to look unbothered, but the confidence had slipped from his face. He couldn't understand how one woman, one sentence, could make him feel smaller. Maya sat still, no trace of victory. She knew how quickly this society could pin the label difficult on a person of color who dared to keep her seat. She knew that if she said even one word too many, they would use that word against her. So she chose silence. Silence, but not surrender. Silence. That makes others face themselves. A shaft of light from the window laid across her face. Maya closed her eyes, drawing a slow breath. She wasn't angry. She was matching her heartbeat the way you listen to a jet engine during a small vibration. Behind her, Bradley leaned toward Monica and murmured. There were nods, quick glances, and the quiet choreography of an escalation. Maya didn't need to hear the words to know what was coming. She had worked in aviation long enough to understand when a system meets what it doesn't understand. Its first reflex is control. She raised her eyes, following the aisle, where the light along the floor traced bright lines like boundaries. In her mind surfaced a sentence she'd once given her students: "Power isn't evil, but privilege left unchecked makes people blind to justice." She smiled, faintly, as if the words had returned to put her to the test. A few minutes later, Monica came back with a small intercom unit in hand. She said something toward the front. Her voice lowered. Her eyes flicked toward Maya, then away quickly. And with that, the wheels of procedure began to turn. A small report was about to be sent non-compliant passenger. From here, power would no longer sit with the most reasonable, but with those protecting their egos under the banner of flight safety. In that moment, the first-class cabin of SkyWest Global Flight 729 seemed to hold its breath. No one spoke, but the silence grew so heavy you could hear every soft exhale, every quiet click of a seatbelt. Bradley Stone sat back in his chair, lips pressed tight, eyes fixed on the screen ahead, though he wasn't watching anything. He tried to mask the sting of rejection behind a practiced calm. And Dr. Maya Ellison, still seated in 2A, acted as if nothing had happened. She lowered her gaze to her documents again. Her thin fingers held a highlighter and marked a line. Protocol 7B. Passenger conflict de-escalation. A bitter irony floated in the air. The very protocol she had written to prevent in-flight conflict was now about to be used against her. Clara Jenkins, Bradley's young colleague 2 rows back, saw everything, from Bradley's rising irritation to Maya's quiet replies, to the unease in flight attendant Monica's eyes. Her heart quickened. Part of her wanted to stand, to say, "Come on, Bradley, you're wrong." But her lips stayed closed, half out of fear, half out of habit. She'd seen Bradley dismiss team members in meetings, heard him laugh off dissenting voices. He wasn't cruel. Exactly, he just believed power was a tool, not a duty. And in the confined air of this cabin, that power imbalance had never felt sharper. Clara looked at Maya. The woman neither argued nor retreated, nor tried to please anyone. She sat upright, her gaze still and even. The sunlight from the window caught half her face and spilled across the white page in front of her, a frame of light and shadow where ethics and prejudice faced each other without dialogue. The cabin air tightened like a drawn string. The only sound was the steady, impersonal hum of the engines. Now and then, a quiet sigh slipped through the pressurized air and vanished. In the row ahead, an older man leaned toward his wife and whispered, "It's just a seat." "Isn't it?" his wife replied softly, without turning her head. "Yes, but she has the right, doesn't she?" No answer followed. Their words hung there, weightless, unanswered, like justice itself, forgotten somewhere above the clouds. Monica Ruiz still lingered nearby, tray in hand, eyes shifting between Maya and Bradley. She was thinking how to phrase it when she called Thomas Grant, the lead flight attendant. Monica didn't dislike Maya, but she knew if the situation dragged on, she would be blamed for failing to control a passenger. Professional responsibility, a beautiful phrase that often hid the fear of losing your job. She inhaled, then walked away. Maya tilted her head just enough to see Monica's reflection in the window. She didn't need to hear words to know a report was being written. Behind her, Bradley spoke again, just loud enough for nearby Rose to hear, "I just wanted to work." She's making this a bigger deal than it is. A man in a gray suit across the aisle nodded without looking up. People are too sensitive these days. It's just a seat. Maya heard them. She didn't turn, didn't react. Each word fell like a pebble on still water, but the surface refused to ripple. She had learned to let silence become a mirror so that those who threw stones could see their own reflection. Clara's eyes lowered. Her chest tightened with shame. She thought of her mother, a woman who used to say, "The worst thing isn't the one who does wrong, but the one who sees it and stays quiet." She knew she should speak, but when Bradley's cold gaze met hers, her throat closed up. She felt small, trapped inside the thick, invisible silence of the cabin. "I'm sorry," she began, but the words dissolved halfway out. No one heard. No one wanted to. Then, the cabin resumed its normal rhythm, the hiss of soda cans opening, the soft rustle of magazines, the tapping of pens on tray tables. Everyone went back to reading, working, watching movies as if nothing more than a small disagreement had occurred. But something had shifted. Faith fragile. Flickering faith in fairness had been left behind somewhere in the narrow aisle of first class. Maya knew the eyes had turned away, yet their weight still hovered around her like the heat that lingers after a small explosion. She set her pen down, staring at the unfinished note on her page. When a system stays silent in the face of injustice, it ceases to be neutral. It becomes complicit. She had written that line for a training manual years ago, but reading it now, here, it felt different. Silence wasn't just a personal choice, it was the tool by which power preserved itself. Clara turned toward the window. The clouds below looked soft as blankets, peaceful yet hiding winds and turbulence underneath. She wondered if she were in Maya's place, looked at by everyone as the problem. Could she stay this calm? A part of her knew she couldn't. She would have shouted, fought, protested, but Maya didn't. Her silence made Clara feel smaller and ashamed. Nah, at the back of the cabin, Thomas Grant received the report. He straightened his tie and started down the aisle. Each footstep was the sound of an entire system preparing to speak. Monica avoided Maya's eyes as she passed. Bradley's lips curled slightly, not in a smile, but in quiet satisfaction. And Maya remained still, her gaze fixed on the window. The light glinted off the glass, illuminating her face, her eyes steady as if she had already foreseen this moment long ago. No one in that cabin knew that within minutes. The silence they chose would become their own testimony, because when justice is pushed out of seat 2A, it always finds its way back carrying the weight of the sky itself. First class was so quiet you could hear the tick of a clock inside every mind. After a brief exchange at the back of the aisle, Monica Ruiz, 29, a Latina American flight attendant, stepped forward. She wore the professional smile drilled by hundreds of training hours, soft, polite, impeccably neutral, but deep in her eyes, Maya caught something else, the hesitation of someone walking into a situation that wasn't simple. "Ma'am," Monica said gently, "if you could switch seats, it would help us serve more smoothly. He needs to work urgently with his colleague." It sounded like a request, but in that air it took the shape of a sugar-coated order. Maya lifted her head. She didn't rush to answer. She looked at Monica for a few seconds long enough for the other woman to see she wasn't angry, only measuring whether this came from procedure or from prejudice. "I understand," Maya said, voice level, "but I purchased this seat, and I'd like to sit in the seat that's mine." A pause. Monica kept smiling, but the smile had hardened. She knew any non-compliance could be noted and reported. She also knew those notes rarely told the whole story, they only recorded who was difficult. A row back. Bradley Stone began to fidget. He exhaled theatrically, gave a small shake of the head. "Unbelievable," he muttered, just loud enough for two nearby passengers. A middle-aged man glanced at Maya, then quickly looked away. No one spoke aloud, but the way they looked cool, appraising, shrank the luxury of first class into something narrow and airless. Monica turned back, holding the smile in place. "We just want the flight to run smoothly, ma'am." "So do I," Maya replied. "That's exactly why I'd like to remain in my seat." Her tone was composed to the point of unsettling. No flare of anger, no tremor. But that calmness made others uneasy, as if she were holding up a mirror to them all. Monica stepped back, drew a breath, and spoke quietly into her intercom. No one heard the words, but seconds later, a man at the far end, Thomas Grant, the lead flight attendant, looked toward Maya. Bradley caught the look and gave a slight nod, a small nod, just enough to say, "I'm the one who needs protecting." Clara Jenkins, in the row behind, saw everything. She watched each small piece, the glances, the gestures, the tones linked together like a hidden wire, carrying current from prejudice to power. She knew a single wrong word, a single wrong breath could blow the whole thing. The engines droned steadily, but the cabin's balance had shifted. From Maya's seat, she could feel each stare, each breath, each quiet judgment circling her. No one spoke, but everyone was waiting for her to lose her composure so they could believe they were right. She didn't give them that. Maya set her pen down and closed the folder. She turned to the window, where bands of cloud moved parallel to the wing. She knew well, even at altitude, people can build invisible walls. Monica remained there, waiting for the yes she would never hear. Her smile thinned, her voice dropped. "I understand, ma'am, but your refusal is making it difficult for me to work. I'm sorry if sitting in my assigned seat causes inconvenience," Maya said slowly, "but I believe your policy doesn't define that as a fault." Somewhere farther down, a man let out a short, dry, joyless laugh. It sounded like the crackle of a spark hidden gasoline. From a wider angle, this was no longer about a seat. It was a small portrait of society, where convenience sometimes covers for bias. Monica wasn't a villain. She was following procedure. Bradley wasn't a monster. He was defending privilege. And everyone else, the audience to this exchange, persuaded themselves that silence keeps the peace. Only Maya, resisting no one, submitting to no one, held her place, a fixed marker in a headwind. Clara glanced at Maya. She saw a strange kind of strength, not in voice, not in status, but in total self-control under imposed humiliation. Clara wished she could say something and didn't. The bystander's fear again defeated the conscience's courage. Monica walked off, her heels tapping softly on the floor. Small sounds, steady like a countdown clock. Everyone knew what came next when the attendant's smile fails. Authority is escalated upward, and when Thomas Grant, the lead attendant, moved in with that practiced chill, Maya understood the wire had been pulled to its limit. She didn't look up, didn't react, because she knew people who are used to steering the situation always mistake silence for weakness. What they didn't know was that inside that silence were 1,000 hours of resolve and 10 years writing the rules they were about to misapply. Maya closed her eyes, not to avoid to record the looks, the word convenience, the way safety was borrowed as cover. Each detail would become a piece of evidence, a shard of the justice she wouldn't need to shout to prove. Thomas Grant, 45, lead flight attendant, walked down the aisle of first class with the calm of a man practiced in managing difficult situations. His uniform was immaculate to the crease, his voice low, even carrying the confidence of small power exercised at the right time. No emotion on his face, only procedure. He stopped in front of seat 2A, where Dr. Maya Ellison sat, spine straight, both hands resting lightly on the closed file before her. "Ma'am," Thomas began, his tone steady, measured, "we've received a report that you're disrupting service on this flight." The word disrupting fell into the air like a velvet-covered blade. No shouting, no insult yet. The cabin shifted. Every head turned toward her, not to question, but to confirm. They didn't know what had really happened. But when someone in uniform says disrupting, judgment quietly changes hands. Maya looked up, calm as still water in the storm. "How do you define disrupting?" she asked softly. Not defiant, not defensive, just a question. But in the ears of those who hold authority, a question can sound like the first crack in a wall. Thomas hesitated for a fraction, then recovered. "Ma'am, when a passenger refuses to comply with a reasonable request from the crew, that's considered an interference with service and flight safety." The words rolled out like memorized policy, clean, exact, and bloodless. Maya nodded, her gaze unwavering. "So, sitting in the seat I paid for counts as interference." The question sliced thin between logic and absurdity. Thomas kept the professional smile, but a muscle near his eye twitched. He knew this wasn't the type of situation he'd trained for. He was used to drunks, loud voices, people who broke rules. But this woman, quiet, composed, looking directly at him made him feel as if he were the one being examined. "Ma'am," he said slower now, "our procedures are designed to ensure comfort and safety for all passengers. If you're unwilling to cooperate, we'll have to proceed according to regulation, procedure, ensure, proceed." Words that sounded reasonable, each one sliding off the edge of ethics like marbles down a tilted table. Across the cabin, the air changed. Those who'd been silent now felt relieved because authority had spoken. They could believe their silence earlier was right. A system was in motion, and they were merely its obedient parts. Clara Jenkins, seated behind, felt the cold spread with every sentence. She watched Maya still upright, still quiet. Light from the window caught her face. In her eyes flickered a sadness so still it seemed ancient, the sadness of someone who had seen this pattern too many times before. Bradley Stone leaned back, one arm over the armrest, mouth curved slightly. To him, things were finally being handled. He didn't need to speak anymore. He could sit and watch, smug in the comfort that justice, as he defined it, wore a uniform. Thomas bent slightly, lowering his voice, but not his authority. "Ma'am, we can arrange another flight if you're unable to cooperate." Maya didn't answer at once. She looked down at the ticket on the table, the words printed clearly, Seat 2A, SkyWest Global 729, London Heathrow. Her fingertip brushed the paper, deliberate. I don't need another flight. Mr. Grant, I only need to travel in the seat I paid for like every other passenger. No raised tone, no defiance, but the quietness carried further than any shout. A few passengers cleared their throats, exchanged uneasy glances. Their discomfort wasn't for Maya, it was for themselves. She was saying something too obvious, too true, and they were ashamed they hadn't said it first. Thomas exhaled through his nose, holding his calm. I understand, ma'am. But at this point, I'm required to document the incident and notify the captain. And, with that single line, the escalation was complete. Maya knew what that meant. Once a situation is documented, it ceases to be human. It becomes procedural. Procedure is how systems stay spotless while still doing the dirty work. She said nothing more, just gave a small nod, eyes steady. Do what you need to do. The sentence was light, but it left Thomas feeling as though control had just slipped through his hands. He turned away, steps heavier than before. Monica Ruiz stood behind him, clutching her clipboard tight. She could see how far things had gone. All she'd wanted was to keep things smooth, but the very process she'd trusted had turned a simple request into a crisis. She avoided Maya's eyes as she passed, as if trying to step out of her own reflection. Outside, the light had changed. The sky over San Francisco dulled to pale gray. The plane still sat motionless on the runway, engines waiting but inside. A storm had already formed, not between people, but between dignity and authority. Maya sat quietly, chin slightly raised, eyes on the window. In the reflection, her face overlapped with Thomas's departing figure. Two people, two worlds, two definitions of the word stability. She closed her eyes and murmured to herself, "They call it safety. I call it fear." A faint smile crossed her lips, thin as a line of light across the wing outside. She didn't know yet that, within minutes, these procedures would open a new kind of audit, one where the system itself would be tested against its own laws. The cockpit door clicked open, a small sound. Yet in a cabin strung tight with tension, it cracked like a gavel striking wood. Captain Douglas Reed, 58, emerged, tall, composed, eyes that had seen storms both literal and human. His voice carried that quiet command that didn't need to rise above conversation because it never had to. He wasn't the kind of man who lost his temper. That was what made his presence colder. Monica Ruiz stepped forward immediately, lowering her voice as she began her report. Her sentences were short, clean, and carefully chosen, the kind of story shaped not by facts, but by survival. She didn't mean harm. She was simply doing what people do when they sense danger, protect themselves. From her seat, Dr. Maya Ellison watched the exchange. It reminded her of a ritual of authority she'd seen countless times in safety hearings, in post-incident reports, in closed-door briefings, a small human moment translated into procedural language until the person without power became the problem. Reed nodded once, his face unreadable. He stepped closer, one hand resting lightly on the seat back in front of Maya. The gold bars on his shoulder caught the light from the window, the unmistakable symbol of absolute authority at altitude. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady, low. The crew reports that you're refusing to comply with their instructions. If you continue, we'll have to ask you to deplane. No question, no dialogue. Just a verdict read aloud before trial." Maya lifted her gaze, not defiant, not pleading, simply observing. She looked at him the way one studies a machine to understand its function, not to resist it. "I'm not sure I understand," she said quietly. "I've been sitting in my seat, not speaking loudly, not causing disturbance. Is that what you consider noncompliance?" Reed hesitated. For half a heartbeat, doubt flickered, but training reclaimed him. Years of command had wired his instinct to side fast. "Stay firm." "Ma'am, I trust my crew's judgment. They're trained to identify disruptive behavior. I can't let a small issue delay an entire flight." Small issue. The phrase slid in like a blade, soft, sharp, cutting through dignity with a manager's smile. In that instant, Maya saw it clearly. Her composure wasn't being read as professionalism. It was being recast as passive defiance. Clara Jenkins sat frozen 2 rows back, heart pounding. She knew Maya hadn't done anything wrong. She wanted to speak, to stand, but Reed's calm authority pinned her in place. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he didn't have to. That was how ultimate power worked. It didn't need violence, only belief. As long as the crowd believed he was right, he would be. Bradley Stone sat smugly in his seat. To him, this was resolution clean and efficient. The problem was being handled, the order of things restored. He didn't see that his tiny triumph, born from entitlement, was about to ignite something far larger than his ego could comprehend. Maya looked straight at the captain. Her tone didn't rise. It never needed to. "I understand your duty, Captain Reed," she said evenly. "But I'm afraid the decision you make today won't just affect this flight." Reed frowned. "I'm not sure what you mean." "You will," she murmured. "When you realize you've just violated a safety protocol, one I co-authored, for a fraction of a second." Reed blinked a pause, a glitch in the rhythm of authority. Then he smoothed his expression. To him, her words sounded like the desperation of someone clinging to pride. He nodded once toward Thomas Grant, the silent signal to proceed. Maya began gathering her things. No rush, no tremor, every motion deliberate, the precision of an engineer closing her final report. No shouting, no pleading, only silence heavy enough to draw every pair of eyes in the cabin. She rose. The light from the window slanted across her silver-streaked hair, framing her in pale gold. "Justice doesn't always speak," she said softly. "Sometimes it just watches." Reed watched her, and for the briefest moment felt something hollow stir inside him. Not guilt, not anger, just the echo of emptiness that follows a man who's done what the system told him to do. He turned away. Monica lowered her head. Bradley exhaled, satisfied. And Maya. She walked the narrow aisle with quiet dignity, passing through the still air of a system convinced of its own correctness. Behind her, Thomas's voice carried, crisp and procedural. Passenger exited the aircraft without incident. A neat sentence, flawless, soulless. Soon it would appear in a report, a few tidy lines erasing an entire truth. A black woman removed from her rightful seat for refusing to surrender her place. Clara Jenkins didn't move. A quiet ache filled her chest, not because she'd done something wrong, but because she'd done nothing at all. She finally understood injustice doesn't survive on cruelty alone. It endures on the silence of good people watching. The aircraft was silent again. Order restored. But somewhere in that calm cabin, among the soft lights and polished surfaces, no one sensed that justice pushed through the pipes of procedure was building pressure, waiting for the perfect moment to explode. In the first-class cabin of SkyWest Global 729, the air felt dense enough to cut. Everyone stayed seated, stayed quiet, but all eyes tracked Dr. Maya Ellison, the black woman the captain had just ordered off the plane. No one spoke, but their eyes did. Some held pity, some held satisfaction, most held avoidance, the most common look of any era, when people choose safety over fairness. Maya sat still for a long moment. No movement, no expression. Her fingers on the closed file trembled not from fear, but from restraint. Outside the window, runway light bounced off the glass and washed her cheek in a cold silver. She closed her eyes and drew a long breath. If you listened closely, it sounded like a release light, and as heavy as a lifetime of effort. Thomas Grant, the lead attendant, stood a few steps away. His voice was low, even cold, "Ma'am. We're very sorry, but this is the captain's decision. Please cooperate and deplane." No one in the crew met her eyes. Even Monica Ruiz, who at first had only wanted to smooth things over, lowered her gaze and looked away. Maya nodded. If that's the only option. She said a breath more than a sound. "I'll go." No argument, no tears, only a woman slowly packing her bag, folding her documents, straightening the ticket stamped clearly, Seat 2A, SkyWest Global 729. For a moment, time stopped. No one expected her to be this calm. She didn't justify, didn't protest, didn't try to prove she was right. In this world, sometimes calm is the strongest form of resistance. Clara Jenkins watched, hands clenched on her lap. She wanted to say, "You don't have to." The words died in her throat. She understood this woman wasn't backing down. She was choosing not to fight by rules written by those who set the trap. Maya stood. The click of her seatbelt releasing cut the silence like a thin blade. She dipped her head politely, as if leaving a meeting not being asked off an aircraft. Some passengers avoided her eyes. A silver-haired woman in the row ahead gave a hurried nod, then turned away. Bradley Stone stayed put, arms crossed, lips curled, half smile, half self-soothing. No one noticed that inside his arrogance was an animal fear, a fear that justice remembers faces. As Maya passed Monica, she spoke softly. "Ruiz, don't be afraid. You're doing what the system trained you to do." Monica froze, unsure how to answer, but something flickered in her eyes, a hairline crack in the conscience. She walked the aisle slowly, between two lines of lit seats. Her shadow stretched long on the floor, slender, straight like the path of a shaft of light through glass. The cabin felt compressed, tight as pressure before a storm. Only the low-engine thrum and the small wheels of her bag followed her steps. A man near the back whispered, "God," over a seat. His wife answered so softly only he could hear, "No, not the seat. The place." At the door, an airport security officer was waiting. He said nothing, nodded to Thomas, and motioned for Maya to follow. She paused at the threshold and looked back into the cabin. Every eye was on her, curious, wary, some a little sympathetic, but not one carried respect. She smiled a small, knowing curve, the smile of someone who sees the end in ahead and chooses to meet it, standing tall. In row 2, Clara still hadn't looked away. An old question echoed in her mind. If I were in that seat, would I be calm enough to leave without losing myself? There was no answer, only the soft tap of Maya's shoes on the jet bridge, ringing in the narrow space like a farewell. Behind her, Thomas sealed the door. His voice came dry over the intercom. Passenger has deplaned, preparing for redeparture. Brief, bloodless. A procedure closed like a stamp dropped on a report no one bothers to read. But if you look closely at the shine on the floor, you could still see Maya's shadow, thin, faint, not yet gone. Outside, she paused midway down the jet bridge. Runway light rose up and bathed her face in pale gold. She exhaled slowly, eyes half shut. For a moment, she no longer looked like someone just humiliated, but like someone checking the altitude of her pride. She took out her phone and opened contacts. Her thumb hovered over a familiar name, Jordan Blake, Airport Operations Director. She didn't call. She simply watched the screen glow in her palm, weighing whether justice should be awakened now. Then she put the phone away, not from fear, but because she wanted the silence to finish its work first. There was no hatred in Maya's chest, only a deep, deep sadness, the kind carried by someone who wrote the rules meant to protect people, and was excluded by those same rules. They just retaught me the first lesson of power, she thought. It doesn't need to be right, only believed. She gave a thin smile and stepped onto the concourse. Light skated across the cold white tiles. Each step she took carried no vengeance, only silent testimony to justice's temporary defeat. The jet bridge, that narrow passage between light and shadow, became the stage for a scene none of them would ever forget. Maya Ellison walked slowly, both hands clutching her document case. Behind her, 2 airport security officers followed close enough to look professional, far enough to signal caution. No one spoke, only the echo of shoes on the metal floor, blending with the faint hum of waiting engines. The air was so thick you could touch it. At the back of the cabin, a passenger quietly raised his phone, not to intervene, just to record. That's the instinct of our age when people are too afraid to speak. They film. In the phone's small frame, a black woman appears calm, walking between 2 men in uniform. If you didn't know the story, you might think she'd done something wrong, because images like power can twist truth with nothing but angle. Halfway down the bridge, Maya turned her head. Light from the plane's window glinted across her face. Her eyes were steady, but her voice when it came was sharp as glass. You know, they just violated Protocol 7B, the one I wrote. The 2 officers exchanged glances. One frowned, the other pretended not to hear. They were trained not to engage with deplaned passengers. Yet her words made them hesitate as if they'd just heard something they weren't supposed to. Inside the cabin, Clara Jenkins sat frozen, watching through the window. From her seat, Maya's figure grew smaller, swallowed by light. That sentence echoed in her mind, Protocol 7B, the one I wrote. She didn't fully understand it, but she knew this woman was not ordinary. At the front of the jet bridge, Thomas Grant signed the handover report to security, a short, exact form, the emotionless language of administrative authority. He didn't look up as Maya passed, only said, "We wish you a safe onward flight." "Ma'am?" Maya paused half a second and smiled faintly. "You can rest easy. This flight is still safe thanks to the regulations I helped you write." Thomas looked up. For the first time, he really saw her. Hanging from her bag was a small metal badge engraved Dr. Maya Ellison, International Aviation Safety Board. His stomach dropped. A chill climbed his spine. But it was too late. The decision was signed. The doors were closing. And now all he could do was keep playing his part. Maya kept walking. The officers opened the final door. Cold air rushed in, tossing a few silver strands of her hair. She adjusted her scarf and stepped onto the concrete of San Francisco International Airport. Her footsteps sounded deep, even not trembling, as if each one measured the distance between humiliation and pride. Inside the cabin, silence held for a few seconds. Bradley Stone turned toward the window where Maya had vanished. He said nothing, only smirked. But somewhere behind that smirk was a flicker of unease he couldn't name. Clara looked at him and whispered, "Who do you think she was?" "Just someone who didn't know her place." Bradley said flatly, "That line, someone who didn't know her place, slipped into the live-streamed video already spreading online. No one knew yet that within hours, it would headline hundreds of articles." Out on the tarmac, Maya gazed across the runway lights. Rows of amber lamps stretched into the distance like a trail of memory. She pulled out her phone and opened contacts. The name Jordan Blake, Airport Operations Director, glowed on the screen. Her former student, the one she'd trained in crisis response and aviation. Her finger hovered over call. She knew this call wouldn't be a complaint, it would trigger a full internal investigation, but she didn't press it. Not yet. She wanted the silence to breathe a little longer, to let the wrong expose itself, to let arrogance show its true face. A maintenance worker passing by noticed her and nodded. Then he saw her nameplate, froze, wide-eyed. "Wait, you're Dr. Ellison from the safety board." She nodded calmly. He swallowed hard, glancing at the officers who had just escorted her, their faces draining pale. They suddenly understood they had just removed a living symbol of aviation integrity. No one spoke, but this time, silence wasn't safety. It was confession. She stopped mid-hallway, looking out at the runway. Another plane took off, leaving a white streak across the gray sky. She exhaled softly. Everything flies away eventually. Only truth stays. The last light of day brushed her face, and her eyes shimmered, reflecting an entire horizon. She knew justice hadn't won yet, but the battle had begun. The air inside San Francisco International Airport still hung thick, the stillness before a storm. Behind her, the aircraft door had closed, taking with it all the whispers, judgments, and silences of first class. Ahead, Dr. Maya Ellison stood by the window, looking out across a runway glowing with light, jets lined up for takeoff, their blinking red beacons pulsing like the heartbeat of a giant machine, orderly, powerful, unstoppable. But Maya knew with one single order that whole rhythm could stop in under 2 minutes. She had written that procedure herself. She opened her phone, scrolled to the name Jordan Blake. Her finger paused not from hesitation, but from understanding. this wouldn't just be a call. It would be a test of conscience for one man, and for the entire system that once hailed her as its guardian. She pressed call, 3 rings, then a man's voice warm, startled Dr. "Ellison, is that really you? I just saw the video, God. She cut in, calm and precise, Jordan, stay focused. We have work to do. Flight 729 SkyWest Global has committed a Category 1 violation. I'm authorizing activation of the tarmac hold protocol." On the other end, silence. Jordan Blake, 42, Director of Airport Operations, not just a former student, but once the youngest safety engineer in his MIT cohort, handpicked by her for his ability to stay calm in chaos. Now, that same calm let him grasp the full gravity of her words. Tarmac hold protocol, an emergency order halting all takeoffs and landings. It was invoked only in cases of severe passenger safety violations or breaches of International Flight Authority regulations. And only the International Aviation Safety Board, IASB, where Maya was a sitting member, could call for it. "You mean Regulation 7B?" Jordan asked, voice steadying. "Yes," she said. "Category 1 violation. The crew failed on both procedure and conduct. And, Jordan, you know what that means." He didn't ask again, just a single breath. Then his voice turned firm metallic. "I'll initiate it now." In the central operations room, Jordan set the phone down and turned to his assistant. "Activate tarmac hold code 7B. Suspend all takeoffs until the International Board authorizes release." Heads whipped toward him in disbelief. "Sir, that's a standard commercial flight." Jordan cut her off, each word clipped and cold. Nothing is standard when an aviation safety expert is thrown off a plane for following the rules she helped write. Silence. The team began typing on the main screen. The line, Flight 729. Hold flashed red. A dry beep echoed, signaling that runway sector 3R was now locked down. Out on the tarmac, SkyWest Global 729 had just begun to taxi. In the cockpit, Captain Douglas Reed gripped the throttle when a voice crackled over radio. "SkyWest 729, hold position. Repeat, hold position. Temporary ground order from Central Ops." Reed frowned. "Hold for what reason?" "Unclear, sir. We were told to maintain position pending review from the Aviation Safety Division." The words hung in the cockpit like weight. Monica looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at Reed. No one spoke, but everyone felt that something larger than gravity had just entered the cabin. Meanwhile, Maya stood by the glass corridor overlooking the runway. She watched as the signal lights shifted from green to amber. She knew that meant only one thing: every flight was now grounded. No cheers, no triumph, just a quiet breath, letting the cold wind brush her face. "It's not because I'm right," she thought. "It's because the system needs to remember justice must never fall asleep." In the control room, Jordan called back. "Dr. Ellison, the hold is active. I'll initiate a full compliance audit of Flight 729. Would you like to be present during the review?" "Yes, Jordan." But this time, she paused. "I'll board that plane not as a passenger, but as an investigator." Inside, Flight 729 Bradley Stone began to fidget. He noticed attendants hurrying, whispering. Then Captain Reed's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a technical concern, our flight will be temporarily delayed. Please remain seated," Bradley muttered under his breath. "Technical now, seriously." Clara Jenkins turned to him, soft but clear. Maybe it's not technical. Maybe it's human. At the far end of the runway, the convoy of Aviation Compliance Office vehicles rolled forward. Inside, one of them sat Maya, eyes fixed on the plane glowing under floodlights. Wind whipped across the tarmac, carrying the faint pulse of jet engines like the heartbeat of a system being forced to face itself. Justice doesn't always need to be shouted, she thought. It just needs the right person to speak. The SkyWest Global 729 had just begun to taxi. Outside, the green runway lights blinked rhythmically, like the veins of a living system. Captain Douglas Reed adjusted the throttle, his voice firm over Radio SkyWest 729, ready for takeoff on runway 3R, but seconds later, the air traffic controller's voice cut in, sharp, urgent, unyielding. SkyWest 729, hold position. Repeat, hold position immediately. No one in the cockpit understood. Monica Ruiz looked at Thomas Grant, her face pale. Hold position. Are we having a malfunction? No, Thomas murmured. This isn't technical. It's coming from Central Ops. The cabin fell silent. Passengers exchanged looks. A few took off their headphones, sensing something unusual. Bradley Stone frowned. What now? I've got a meeting in London in 6 hours. But Clara Jenkins, still staring through the window, felt it a different kind of silence. Not the silence of injustice, the silence before balance is restored. Beyond the windows, under the amber glow of San Francisco International Airport, a convoy of Aviation Compliance Office vehicles rolled toward the runway. Red and white lights strobed across the plane's polished metal flashes of blood and steel. In the lead car sat Dr. Maya Ellison, her eyes fixed on the aircraft, the same one that had expelled her 15 minutes earlier. Now she returned, not as the humiliated passenger, but as the authorized representative of the system every airline was bound to obey. Beside her, Jordan Blake, Director of Airport Operations, spoke quietly. Are you sure about this? The crew will face a full investigation. Jordan, she replied, her voice calm but edged. This isn't about payback. It's about principle. No one, not even a captain, has the right to strip a passenger of dignity. The convoy stopped beside the jet. Headlights washed the metal skin of the aircraft, revealing the bold print SkyWest Global 729 London Heathrow. Maya stepped out first. The wind caught the silver in her hair, brushing it softly back. Gone was the stillness of the wronged woman. In its place stood the calm authority of someone ready to bear witness to the collapse of arrogance. Ground engineers hurried over, nodding respectfully. One recognized her immediately. Dr. Ellison, has the board approved the tarmac hold? Yes, she said, nodding slightly. We proceed by the book. I'll be conducting an immediate crew compliance review before takeoff authorization. In the cockpit, Reed noticed the vehicles surrounding his aircraft. He scowled. What in the world? Are they doing an inspection now? Thomas Grant's voice trembled slightly. Captain, I think this is about the passenger we escorted off. The words froze the cabin. Reed turned to Monica. What exactly did you tell them? I only reported what happened. Did you mention her name? Yes, Dr. Maya Ellison. The captain looked away, exhaling a heavy breath of realization. He now understood that the struggle for control had shifted beyond his command. Below, the mobile stairs rolled up to the door. Yellow light flooded the fuselage as Dr. Maya Ellison climbed step by step. No one spoke, but every face knew this woman was no longer a victim. She was the embodiment of lawful authority and of the intelligence once dismissed. At the door stood Thomas Grant, stiff and pale. Maya met his eyes, her tone even Mr. Grant, under Regulation 7B. Any case involving forced deplaning requires the presence of an independent inspector from the International Aviation Safety Board. Today, that inspector is me. Thomas froze. His voice faltered. You're with the board, I am. And I'm not here to cost anyone their job. I'm here to see whether the system we run still deserves the word fair. Inside the cabin, whispers rippled. Passengers recognized her, the woman escorted out earlier, now returning with a team, her badge glinting under the lights. A man leaned toward his wife. That's her, the one they removed. The woman nodded, eyes wide. Maybe. She's the one who wrote the rule they broke. No one laughed. No one even breathed too loudly. The silence returned heavier now, sacred, almost as though justice itself were walking down that narrow aisle. Maya didn't raise her voice. She instructed the crew to step out of the cockpit to review their procedure. Each sentence left her lips slow, precise like a metronome on steel. She didn't accuse. She didn't humiliate. But every word sliced through the thin armor of pretended authority. Jordan Blake stood behind her, observing quietly. He knew this moment would be recorded in aviation history when a black woman, once dismissed and escorted away, brought an entire runway to a halt and made it listen. After the preliminary review, Maya stepped out, leaving behind a cabin hushed and thoughtful. She turned to Jordan and said softly, "Justice doesn't need to win big. It just needs to land in the right place." He nodded, eyes bright, not from pride, but from witnessing dignity turned into power. Meanwhile, in the control tower, a calm voice came over the radio. Runway 3R cleared. Hold remains active pending further review. The entire stretch of runway miles of light and concrete stayed frozen. No aircraft would move until the woman once forced to leave confirmed it was safe to fly. A beautiful paradox, and the quietest form of justice. In the first-class cabin of SkyWest Global 729, the air had changed. No loud voices, no judgments, only stillness heavy as metal. In the aisle between two rows, Jordan Blake stood straight. He was no longer the tentative student from years ago, but the director of airport operations acting in official capacity. His voice carried, slow and precise, under the authority of the International Aviation Safety Board. "I'm calling for an impartial review here and now." Eyes went to him, then to Dr. Maya Ellison, the woman who had returned to the cabin, quiet, composed. Her gaze bright enough to search every detail. No one spoke, but everyone understood the real confrontation had begun. Captain Douglas Reed stepped out of the cockpit. His face was tight, his voice rough. "What is this? I have the authority to ensure flight safety." Maya nodded once. "Yes, Captain, you do, but you do not have the authority to abuse it." She opened the folder in her hands and slid out a printed sheet, the upper right corner stamped with a familiar line, Regulation 7B Passenger De-Escalation Framework. Light bounced off the page. The title seemed to glow. Maya spoke slowly, each word ringing like metal striking metal. Under 7B, Section 3.4. Any passenger labeled disruptive must be evaluated against 3 factors: conduct, language, and threat to safety. Not one of those factors has been established in this incident. Thomas Grant swallowed hard, fighting for composure. We were following procedure. Ma'am. Maya turned to him, meeting his eyes. Which procedure allows you to assign disruption to a person who lawfully refused to surrender her assigned seat? Tell me honestly, did you read the definitions under Clause 2.7? Thomas said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence answered for him. Monica Ruiz, the young attendant who had urged Maya to yield for convenience, stood back. Hands laced together, her eyes were red. I was following my supervisor's direction. I meant no disrespect. Maya inclined her head. I know, and that is precisely why I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to correct the system that frightened you into seeing a lawful refusal as an act of rebellion. Monica lowered her head, lips trembling. In that moment, she understood sometimes silence isn't just complicity, it is the price of obedience. Jordan looked around the cabin, then spoke, voice firm. Based on preliminary review, I'm identifying at least 3 failures. Violation of Regulation 7B in assessing the passenger. Absence of independent verification prior to enforcing removal. Failure to ensure the passenger's right to be heard. He paused, glancing to Maya for confirmation. She nodded and added, evenly, without rancor. One more, Jordan. A systemic failure, systemic bias, when decision-makers don't recognize how prejudice has crept into their judgment. The cabin thickened. Captain Reed did not reply. He stepped half a pace back, his eyes meeting Maya's for the first time without challenge, but with silent acknowledgement. I apologize if you felt disrespected. Maya's brow tightened a fraction, her voice still gentle. No, Captain, I don't feel disrespected. I was disrespected, and when a passenger is treated unjustly, the issue is not feeling, it's fact. No one spoke. A few passengers looked at one another, then lowered their eyes. The silence now was no longer collusion. It was the moment of recognizing the line between power and right. Clara Jenkins, who had witnessed everything from the start, stood. Her voice shook, but held. I can confirm what Dr. Ellison said. She did nothing disruptive. She only defended her seat. Jordan recorded the statement, then looked to Maya. Their eyes met a passing look between 2 generations who understood that justice doesn't need to shout. It needs to be attested. Maya closed her folder and said quietly, I'm not asking for punishment. I want an accurate record. When a system fails, the fix isn't to hunt for a scapegoat. It's to return to the principles it was built on. Jordan held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. I understand, and I give you my word that's what we'll do. She turned to the crew, her voice small but clear in the tight air. You chose the wrong person to humiliate today, but remember tomorrow. Seat 2A might hold someone else. They deserve respect too, even without titles or honors. She turned and walked out of the cabin. Each step was light, leaving behind a system beginning to examine itself. Jordan watched her go, then spoke into the headset. Hold the aircraft an additional 30 minutes. I need to complete the report. This flight departs only when every compliance step is met. Outside, the engine settled. Runway light reflected along the glass where Maya's silhouette thinned, then disappeared into the glow of the inspection convoy. There was no applause, no cheer, only a spread in awareness that order had been reset, not by force, but by clarity. 6 weeks after the incident on SkyWest Global 729, the skies over San Francisco were still bright and blue. But for some, that sky no longer meant the same thing. It seemed life had moved on, yet the aviation world hadn't forgotten. Its foundation was discipline, and in that world, even the smallest deviation leaves a lasting scar. The investigation by the International Aviation Safety Board was complete. On a Monday morning, a 200-page report landed at SkyWest Global's headquarters. Across the first page, a short line stood alone. Flight 729 internal compliance failure. Level 1 breach. The first name listed Captain Douglas Reed, the man who once believed a captain's authority was absolute. When the board asked if he realized that removing a passenger based on unverified statements was wrong, he sat in silence for a long time. Then he said, "At the time, I thought I was protecting the flight." The investigator replied, and now he lowered his eyes. "Now I know I was only protecting my pride." That sentence was entered into the record. A week later, the airline suspended his license and ordered him to attend a crisis management and bias awareness course. It wasn't a harsh punishment, but for a man who had lived by authority, being told that to relearn how to listen was the hardest lesson of all. Thomas Grant, the lead flight attendant, faced a stricter ruling. His certification was revoked, his contract terminated immediately. The reason stated plainly: failure of neutrality, violation of the service principles, implicit gender and racial bias. On his last day, he stood on the tarmac watching planes climb into the sky, white contrails crossing the blue. He understood then that in aviation, a world built on precision, a single minute of prejudice can send an entire career into freefall. Monica Ruiz, the young flight attendant, also received her termination notice. She didn't argue, she didn't cry, but weeks later, Maya received a small envelope with no sender, only a single handwritten line: "I was wrong. I'm starting over this time, with courage." Inside was the small cabin crew, SkyWest Global pin removed from her uniform. Maya kept it, not out of satisfaction, but as a quiet reminder some people aren't cruel, they just never learned when to stop obeying injustice. As for Bradley Stone, the man who once said, "Do you know who I am?" he finally understood how meaningless that question was. The video of the incident spread across social media, sparking outrage worldwide. The investors behind his $1 million deal withdrew. His company's internal statement read, "Mr. Stone's conduct and remarks contradict the human values our brand upholds." Weeks later, he sold his sports car and cleared out his office. The man who thought success was armor finally saw that privilege cannot protect a heart that disrespects others. Yet, amid the fallout, a small light appeared. Clara Jenkins, the quiet colleague who had stayed silent out of fear, was the first to speak during the investigation. She told the truth, all of it, without embellishment. That honesty risked her career. But, instead, her European firm commended her transparency. 3 months later, a letter arrived for your honesty and courage in defending fairness under pressure. She was promoted to head of partnership relations. At her first meeting in the new role, a coworker asked what she'd learned from the whole ordeal. Clara smiled faintly. I learned that silence might save you today, but only truth can save you forever. Meanwhile, Dr. Maya Ellison returned to teaching at the MIT Institute of Aeronautics after submitting her final report. But now, when she stepped into class, she spoke not only of flight mechanics or aerodynamics. She taught about dignity under crisis, how a person can stay calm when disrespected, and how intellect can guide one safely through prejudice. One afternoon, Jordan stopped by her office. He smiled. You know, ever since Flight 729 airlines everywhere are reviewing their passenger handling protocols. They're calling it the Ellison effect. She laughed softly and shook her head. I don't need an effect named after me. I just need people to understand that justice isn't about winning. It's about correcting at the right time. Outside, sunset painted the San Francisco International runway in gold. Jets lined up and took off, steady and safe, as though no storm had ever shaken this sky. But somewhere within the system, people still whispered about that day, a symbol of how one calm woman made the machinery of power pause and reflect. And there, justice arrived not through shouting, but through the quiet steadiness of someone who truly knew her worth. 6 weeks after the SkyWest Global 729 incident, San Francisco's sky was still clear blue, but for some, it no longer meant the same thing. Life seemed to have moved on, yet the aviation world had not forgotten. Built on discipline, it knows that even the smallest deviation leaves a lasting mark. The International Aviation Safety Board investigation was done. On a Monday morning, a 200-page report arrived at the SkyWest Global headquarters. Across the first page was one short line: Flight 729 internal compliance failure, Level 1 breach. The first name listed was Captain Douglas Reed, the man who once believed a captain's power was absolute. When asked if he realized removing a passenger on an unverified claim was wrong, he sat silent for a long time. Then he said, at the time, I thought I was protecting the flight. The investigator asked, and now he lowered his eyes. Now I know I was just protecting my pride. The words were entered into record. A week later, the airline suspended him and required a crisis management and bias awareness course. It wasn't a harsh penalty, but for a man of command, being told to relearn how to listen was the hardest lesson of all. Thomas Grant, the lead attendant, faced more severe discipline. His certification was revoked, contract terminated, reason given lack of neutrality, service principle violation, implicit gender and racial bias. On his last day, he stood on the apron watching jets rise, white trails cutting the sky. He understood that in aviation, a world measured by precision, 1 minute of prejudice can send a career into free fall. Monica Ruiz, the young flight attendant, received her own termination letter. She didn't argue or cry. Weeks later, Maya found a small envelope in her mail. Unsigned, I was wrong. I'm starting over this time, with courage. Inside was the cabin crew. SkyWest Global pin she'd removed from her uniform. Maya kept it not in triumph, but as a reminder that some people aren't cruel. They simply never learned when to stop obeying injustice. Bradley Stone, the man who once said, "Do you know who I am?" finally learned how hollow that question was. The video of the incident spread online, drawing outrage. His million-dollar deal investors pulled out. His company's statement read, Stone's behavior contradicts the human values our brand represents. Weeks later, he sold his sports car and cleared his office. The man who thought success was armor discovered that privilege cannot defend a heart that disrespects others. Yet, amid the fallout, a small light appeared. Clara Jenkins, the quiet colleague who once stayed silent from fear, was the first to testify. She told the truth, all of it. Her honesty risked her job, but instead her European firm praised her transparency. 3 months later, she received a letter for honesty and courage in defending fairness under pressure. She was promoted to head of partnership relations. At her first meeting, a coworker asked, 3 months after the incident aboard SkyWest Global 729, the world had shifted into another season. Yet, somewhere on social media, a clip not even 2 minutes long was still being shared endlessly. The opening image showed Dr. Maya Ellison, a black woman, being gently escorted out of the first-class cabin by 2 security officers. She didn't resist. She simply said one quiet line that would soon become a symbol. They just violated Regulation 7B, the one I wrote. At first glance, it sounded simple. But in a world where power often hides behind polite smiles, that line was a clean cut through the numbness of authority. The video first spread among small aviation forums. Then someone reposted it on Twitter with the caption, "The woman removed from the flight. Turns out she's the author of the rule about how passengers should be treated." Within 24 hours, it hit millions of views. Major outlets, CNN, BBC, The Washington Post, Al Jazeera all ran the story, carrying the same headline, "The Maya Effect, when silent justice makes the world listen." A New York Times op-ed wrote, "We've grown too used to seeing the powerless told to stay calm so the system can keep running smoothly. Perhaps, this time, the system itself needed to stop and learn respect." In Los Angeles, a middle-aged black woman shared the clip with a quiet caption, "If she were my daughter, I'd tell her, you've won not because you're right, but because you didn't let them make you like them." They weren't loud words, nor radical ones, just ordinary truths, whispering that dignity can still outlast prejudice. Within a week, the phrase, "the Maya effect," was everywhere. Psychologists, sociologists, and HR consultants began citing it as a textbook case of intellectual resistance to humiliation. A senior journalist at The Atlantic remarked, "No punches, no shouting, only calm precision." And that calm made the entire world hold up a mirror. The ripples moved faster than anyone expected. Within 2 months, Delta Airlines, United, Emirates, and dozens of other carriers announced a new policy, bias, and de-escalation training. The program, inspired by Flight 729, quickly earned its industry nickname, the Maya Program. An Emirates HR director said on CNN, "We realized that technology can control a flight, but only people with respect can keep the skies safe." In Washington, D.C., the Federal Transit Commission hosted a summit called Respect in Transit, opening with Maya's case as its keynote example. Maya didn't attend. She declined every interview request, sending only a short recording. If I could say one thing, it's this power isn't about who gives orders, it's about who keeps their dignity in anger. Across campuses, especially at MIT, her students began hosting small circles called the Maya Sessions. They rewatched the clip, then talked about invisible bias, the quiet assumption that someone is wrong simply because they are different. A young Arab student stood and said softly, "I once saw my mother scolded at an airport for wearing a headscarf." Watching that woman stand calm, I felt something inside me heal. No one spoke afterward, because sometimes healing doesn't need explanation. It just needs to be witnessed. Meanwhile, at SkyWest Global's headquarters, the new CEO held an emergency meeting. They released a rewritten policy manual that began with the line, "No passenger shall ever be treated differently for their status, their color, or their silence." It was said that no rule in the company's history had ever been approved so quickly. And, ironically, that very rule was rebuilt upon the original framework written years ago by Maya Ellison herself. For Maya, life seemed unchanged. She still cycled through MIT's campus, still taught, still started each morning with quiet coffee. But sometimes her students caught her smiling faintly when she heard the Maya effect mentioned on a cafe TV. Not out of pride, but because, for once, a story about respect was being heard louder than one about outrage. Half a world away, at a small airport in Kenya, a young flight attendant named Amina recalled her first de-escalation training session. When asked what she remembered most, she said it was that moment when the woman in the video smiled and said, "I just want to sit in the seat I paid for." I realized that sometimes the kindest thing we can do is to let someone sit exactly where they deserve to be. The media called it a chain reaction of awareness. But to those who look deeper, the Maya effect wasn't a media phrase at all. It was a quiet reminder that justice doesn't need violence to be heard. And somewhere, when one person stays calm amid injustice, they don't just protect themselves, they teach the world how to be human again. As the Maya effect became a household term, the world expected Dr. Maya Ellison to appear on talk shows, attend summits, or accept awards. But she did none of that. She returned instead to her small classroom at MIT, where the only sounds were chalk against the board and students debating over ethics papers. Outside, the world praised her as a symbol of intellect and composure. But to Maya, it was much simpler. I just sat in the seat I paid for, and they had to reconsider how they treated people. That morning, during her seminar on aviation safety and operational ethics, Maya entered as usual. She set down her bag, took off her glasses, and looked at the students, whispering curiously. A young woman raised her hand and asked Professor, "They call your story the Maya effect. How does it feel to be a global symbol?" The room fell silent. Maya smiled gentle, but unreadable. A symbol. "No, I'm just a reminder that any system can fail if it forgets that people are its center." The tension in the room eased. Curiosity faded, replaced by quiet respect. Then Jordan Blake, now the head of the International Aviation Ethics Board, entered the room. He carried a small plaque, placing it on the desk before the class. On it was engraved, "Power without accountability is tyranny. Respect should never be optional." He spoke softly. "This was something Dr. Ellison said to me the day we closed the investigation. We've had it engraved in the board's main chamber." The class went silent again. An older student, a white-haired veteran returning to school, nodded slowly and said, almost to himself, "The world needs more people like her, but maybe what we really need are fewer people who make justice speak up in the first place." Maya smiled, saying nothing, because some answers are best left resting in the listener's gratitude. In the weeks that followed, life resumed its steady rhythm. Maya taught, researched, and occasionally wrote for academic journals. But she noticed something subtle at conferences or airports. People now met her eyes differently. Not as a curiosity, a black woman in aerospace, but as a peer. It was a quiet kind of justice, no declaration, no apology, just acknowledgement. One late afternoon, Maya sat in her usual cafe near the harbor in Cambridge. On the TV above the counter, a brief news report aired SkyWest Global Flight 903 successfully de-escalated a passenger conflict without removal. The airline credited the de-escalation framework authored by Dr. Ellison. She took a sip of tea, eyes softening at the screen, and smiled faintly. Not out of pride, but out of peace, knowing that, somewhere, balance had quietly been restored. People often asked if she had any regrets about the pain, the isolation, the scrutiny. She always answered calmly, no, because if I had responded with anger, they would remember me as the disruptive woman. But by staying silent, they had to look at why I was removed in the first place. Then she would add, gazing toward the fading sunset, sometimes the only way to make people listen is to say nothing at all. Jordan once recalled a moment he'd never forgotten. After the final investigation session ended, everyone had left the conference room except Maya. She sat alone at the table, staring at the old copy of Regulation 7B she had written years earlier. She picked up her pen and quietly added a line to the bottom of the report, not for anyone else to read. Only for herself, justice doesn't shout. It simply waits to be heard. Jordan later quoted that line in a keynote speech, and the audience stood and applauded. But when asked about it afterward, Maya just smiled. I didn't write it for them. I wrote it for me. Over time, the story of Dr. Maya Ellison became a part of aviation history. But what she left behind wasn't just policy reform or media headlines. It was a new definition of strength, the kind that doesn't roar, but endures. Strength that isn't in rank or title, but in the ability to hold one's dignity in the storm of bias. So, when a student once asked, "Professor, if I ever face something like that, what should I do?" she thought for a moment, then answered softly, "Remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not let them turn you into them." On the last night of the semester, Maya returned home late. A gentle rain fell over Boston. She opened her window, breathed in the cool air, and turned on her desk lamp. Her research notebook lay open. She began writing quietly, not about glory, but about ethics, responsibility, and small notes to herself. At the bottom of the page, she added one final line: "I never wanted to win against anyone. I just wanted the world to learn how to treat each other more fairly." The lamplight shimmered on the page, reflecting through the window where raindrops hung like silent music. Time passes like wind brushing over airplane wings. It has been more than 10 years since SkyWest Global Flight 729 was forced to stop on the runway, and the world still remembers it, not as a scandal, but as a living lesson in human dignity. At the International Institute of Aviation in Geneva, during the opening ceremony for a new global training program for pilots and flight crews, the name, Dr. Maya Ellison, still echoes in the hall. A short, black-and-white film plays slow, steady, showing the moment Maya was escorted off the plane. Between the images, the presenter's voice narrates, This was the moment that changed aviation history, when someone labeled a disruptive passenger turned out to be the author of the very safety regulation the world now follows. The room falls silent. No applause. Only stillness, the kind born from respect. Because sometimes the truly great never need to be celebrated, only understood. At MIT, where Maya once taught, students still speak of her as a living legend. Not because she was the most brilliant professor, but because she proved that intellect isn't just for designing planes, it's for making the sky fair. In the Institute's library stands a small room named the Ellison Room. Inside are archives on justice, crisis management, and equality in aviation. On the main wall hangs a photograph of Maya, taken the day she returned to teaching after the incident. She isn't on a stage, nor wearing a professor's robe, just a plain white shirt and a notebook in her hand. Beneath it is a plaque engraved with her words, "I didn't fight to win. I just wanted to sit in the seat my ticket said was mine." Someone once asked Jordan Blake, now president of the Global Aviation Alliance, why they still include that line in every training manual after all these years. He smiled and said, "Because that sentence made us realize justice doesn't begin with revolutions. It begins when each person stands firmly where they belong." He paused, then added quietly, "She never set out to teach anyone a lesson. She simply lived in a way that forced the system to relearn humanity." Every year, on June 12th, the day Flight 729 was grounded major airports across the U.S., and Europe observed Passenger Dignity Day. Runways glow in white light for 3 minutes of silence. No speeches, no slogans, just a long line of soft light stretching across the night sky, a quiet tribute to the woman who made the world stop and listen to the truth. At a conference in London, a young black woman, now the first female captain of a global airline, told her story. "I grew up in Detroit. My mother once told me, 'You don't have to shout to be heard. Just stand still, truth will speak for you.'" Years later, I learned she took that line from Dr. Ellison. She glanced down at the nameplate on her uniform, where 3 words were engraved, "Maya's Rule. Calm is power." Those who were once part of that flight each found their own paths. Captain Douglas Reed, long since grounded, now teaches crisis ethics and begins every class with Maya's story. He tells his students, "She didn't take away my career. She gave me back my conscience." Monica Ruiz, once the young flight attendant, is now a cabin crew trainer for a South American airline. At the start of every session, she writes on the board, "No one has the right to make another person feel they don't belong here." And Clara Jenkins, now Director of European Partnerships, still keeps a small card in her wallet engraved with Flight 729 Witness, a reminder that truth never expires. As for Maya, she's now in her 60s. She lives quietly in a small seaside home near Boston. Every morning, she walks along the sand, notebook in hand, writing reflections for her study on moral response under pressure. Former students sometimes visit, calling her by the name the world once gave her, the woman who made the sky equal again. She always laughs softly. "I didn't make the sky equal. I just reminded the people flying in it to be fair." In the evenings, as the sun dips below the horizon, Maya watches planes drift across the sky. No anger, no bitterness, only the peace of someone who knows that true justice doesn't need applause, only time. That night, she writes her final note of the day. Justice doesn't need a high seat. Sometimes it just sits quietly in seat 2A and still flies with the world, whether anyone notices or not. A new generation of aviators has grown up with her story. They've learned that no system, no matter how advanced, can function without one unteachable thing: respect. And they didn't learn it from textbooks, but from the story of a woman who stayed silent until the world finally listened. The story ends not with applause, but with a long, steady silence, the kind in which everyone understands that dignity, once upheld, can change the entire sky. There are moments in life that don't need shouting, don't need arguments. Just one moment of calm can change the entire world around us. The story of Dr. Maya Ellison, the black woman asked to leave a plane because of prejudice, reminds us of something simple yet profound. True strength doesn't come from power. It comes from holding your dignity when others try to take it away. When Maya chose silence instead of anger, she wasn't weak. She was teaching an entire system to look at itself. From one quiet act, the global aviation industry began to change, and millions learned that respect is never a privilege. It's the foundation of being human. In life, we all face unfairness people who use their position to make others feel small. But remember, this calm does not mean defeat. Sometimes, composure and wisdom speak louder than any argument powerful enough to change hearts without a single raised voice. If you believe that every person, no matter their color, status, or background, deserves fairness and respect, then help us share that message. Hit like, share this video, and subscribe for more real stories about kindness, integrity, and the quiet strength that changes lives. Thank you for watching and for listening, because sometimes, when just one person chooses wisdom over anger, the world becomes a little better because of it.